Hey everyone, good morning. My name is Brianne Sander. I'm a sales specialist here at Palo Alto Networks. I support our Prisma Access product line. Today for an agenda, we are going to discuss some of the emerging challenges that we're seeing our customers face. Mobile user access has already been a challenge, but now with the COVID-19 pandemic, we're seeing an accelerated need for our customers to provide that remote access and be able to scale quickly. We'll dive deep into the architecture of our solution and just some of the programs that we're offering to help our customers out in this time. I'm joined on the call today by my SE, Matt Grenier, who I'm going to turn it over to now. So, Matt, say hi.
Good morning, everybody. So my name is Matt Grenier, as Bree had mentioned. So I'm an SE specialist focusing on the Prisma Access product line here as well. So I've been with the company for just about a year. I've been in this role the entire time. Prior to my tenure here at Palo Alto Networks, I actually came from the customer side. So I've been working with the firewalls for probably just under 7 years from a customer perspective, and looking forward to the conversation today. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the presentation that we have here. So to start, I kind of like to just kind of touch on the topic of the day. And I'm sure, these conversations are things that are at the top of everybody's mind. So what I'd like to do is kind of just share with you a few of the comments that I'm hearing from some of our customers, particularly within the last month or so, and some of the challenges that they're facing. So obviously we're all in the same boat in trying to kind of accommodate this remote or mobile workforce to ensure that we have that business continuity while we're works with this work from home situation. That obviously presents challenges for us as IT professionals to ensure that we can go ahead and deliver that same level of, both security and functionality for all of the apps, resources, and data within your enterprise environment. So some of the things that we're seeing as far as challenges go focus particularly on that remote connectivity, right? So when we talk about people working from home, we have to get them access to our internal resources, and that's going to involve some form of VPN-type concentrator. In this model, when we have a significant portion of our workforce going from home, VPN concentrators aren't always sized to be able to handle that load. So we have compute memory issues on those devices that we need to go ahead and contend with, right? Those boxes were not necessarily designed or architected to have your entire work staff at that home location. So, to overcome that, we need to make sure that we can go ahead and distribute that. And we're going to be talking to you a little bit how we can kind of get some of that load off of those, small or finite amount of VPN concentrators that you have within your environment. Coupled with that is the locations or availability of where those VPN concentrators are, right? So that can create a different user experience for some of your employees who are now accessing the internet and Saas and infrastructure as a service through that one single location, right? So having that backhaul effect from that user, perhaps if they're on the West Coast and accessing a data center on the East Coast, or maybe even worse if they're overseas in Asia Pacific or EMEA, coming back and haircutting everything through a single location in the United States is obviously going to give them a different experience when they're browsing the internet, right? So languages, localization, those are all things that they're potentially going to be missing out on if we have to go ahead and force them to specific select locations. And then obviously, the physical distance that they have to overcome, can present latency challenges for those users, right? So what we don't want to create are conditions where they're not ideal for your employees to go ahead and do their jobs, right? We don't want them to try circumventing a lot of the controls that you've worked so hard to go ahead and put into place. And ultimately, if you can't create those ideal conditions for your work staff, they're going to be looking for ways to go ahead and circumvent that. And, particularly with times like these, I'm sure you have kind of seen all the headlines. The scammers and the hackers are out there, right, trying to key off of the same headlines that you're seeing. So look for upticks in phishing-related emails, campaigns, and things like that, trying to lure your employees into clicking those links. And with the mindset of everybody right now, they're obviously potentially more likely to be clicking on those things to try to gain any type of information they can about those events. The last challenge I'll kind of speak to is really around circuit capacity, right? So, this condition where we're backhauling to those locations, now you not only have, a typical ingress-egress model from a user sitting within that data center, but now we have more traffic coming in over that what is likely the same circuit that's servicing your internet connection for users in that location. So we're really kind of putting additional strain on those circuits. All of those, again, it leads to potential problems where we don't want to create gaps in our security posture. We don't want to make sacrifices or compromises with what we're doing from a security perspective. We want to be able to go ahead and make sure that we're continuing to enable the business while still being able to provide all of that control and visibility that you would expect out of, a next generation firewall platform that Palo Alto Networks delivers. So let's talk about some of the business forces in general that are driving change, aside from, the current course of events that are happening here. In general, we're seeing a significant uptick or adoption in cloud-delivered services. Right. So there's obviously things that are appealing for the people who are delivering the applications for your organizations within the cloud. Highly available, scalable, global footprints. These are all great things that you can achieve by kind of switching your application delivery mechanisms and data storage into that cloud. On the flip side of that, on the client side, obviously users want to be more mobile now. We have our road warriors that don't necessarily want to go into the office every day. They want to bring their own devices to be able to access those resources. And all of these kind of create challenges for us as security professionals to make sure that we can ensure that consistency from a security posture. So the traditional approach to kind of solving this has been to continuously layer upon different technologies in order to go ahead and solve these challenges. So what you're looking at here is kind of the industry standard in terms of how we've solved this problem in the past. So we'll kind of pick on a few of these here just to kind of talk through how we've done that, and then potentially some of the issues that we've kind of encountered with these. So we talk about MPLS. It's kind of been one of the more dominant WAN connectivity options for quite some time. So getting traffic back from your branch or retail locations to your data center, MPLS has been around for a while. And I'm sure everybody can kind of appreciate some of the challenges with MPLS. It's big, it's costly, it's slow to turn up. You're potentially waiting weeks or months for circuits to go ahead and come into place. And with the advent of technologies like SD-WAN, we're able to go ahead and introduce broadband and those DIA type circuits to your branch networks, at a fraction of the cost. And then some of those other services, when you layer on top of it, you can achieve similar type SLAs to kind of take advantage of what is the better performing last mile in that conversation. Web proxies have been around for quite some time. If you're familiar with Palo Alto Networks, it's been kind of our MO that proxies are just not sufficient in order to go ahead and secure traffic going out to the internet. We really feel like it's important to understand what's happening with all ports and all protocols at any given time. And be able to perform full content inspection on all of that traffic, regardless of what application that they're currently leveraging. On the mobile side, obviously remote access VPN to go back to the data center to access those resources. That's been a technology that's been in play for quite some time. The challenges with that we've kind of been speaking to a bit here, and the backhaul and resource utilization are obviously concerns from that mobile user workspace. And the problem is particularly amplified when we talk about that shift into the cloud, right? So does it make sense to go ahead and send all that traffic back to your data center when you're simply just going to be hairpinning out to the internet to access that resource that exists in a SaaS application in AWS? Is there a more efficient or effective way to do that? And ultimately, you don't want to kind of create that condition where you're sending those users out unsecured, right? So again, we don't want to be impediments to the business. We want to go ahead and enable those. We don't want to create those gaps in our posture. Most recently, we've kind of seen another type of proxy evolve, and they're kind of specific to protecting those services within your SaaS-based application. So perhaps you've heard of the term CASB proxy. And these are really going to be kind of focusing, again, on specific ports and protocols as they go out to those different SaaS-based applications. So in a nutshell, these solutions become complex, right? You're layering a lot of different technologies and piecing them together in order to go ahead and achieve this security framework to establish protection for all of your users and all of your data. Obviously, there's different skill sets to go ahead and manage and maintain a lot of these different devices, which creates a lot of operational burden and overhead for your organization. And that is something that we're, trying to get you away from, right? We don't want to make things more complex. We want to reduce operational costs here. For item number 2 here, we talk about poor user experience. We don't want to have a different experience when the user is inside of your physical locations versus when they're at home. Right? Everything should be the same in terms of, what they have the ability to access and the performance that comes along with accessing that securely. And lastly, we've spoken about this one a few times. We don't want to kind of introduce any of those security gaps and any of these different flows that we're kind of see here on the screen. So let's kind of talk about how at Palo Alto Networks we address some of these items. So realistically, this data exists in a lot of different locations. We have Saas, we have infrastructure as a service, obviously we have resources on general internet, and you're most likely have some type of data or resources that are going to be present within your headquarters or your data center locations. On the flip side, we've talked about mobility. How do we go ahead and secure those users when they're both inside of your branch locations and when they're outside of those branch locations? So really what we're trying to do here is align with what Gartner has coined Secure Access Service Edge, or SASE as it's pronounced. And really what that entails is taking a lot of the features and functionality that you see here in these green checkboxes and delivering those to your users in a cloud-delivered model. Right, so for the same reasons that we're seeing application delivery shift into the cloud, we want to be able to kind of take advantage of those same capabilities for both networking and security as well. Right, so we want it to be agile. We want it to move where your users move. We need it to scale when we have any type of resource contention in those locations. And we also want to take advantage of that global footprint to be able to go ahead and deliver the service. So we're going to touch upon a few of these here in the next couple slides and just kind of explain how Palo Alto Networks fits into some of these solutions with some of these key features. After that, we'll go ahead and start to kind of take a look about how the Prisma access architecture is constructed and how it can kind of benefit you, particularly now in these times that we're facing. So one of the first key tenets with really any Palo Alto Networks products is really that zero trust type approach. And really the way I see zero trust, there's several components to that. We need to understand exactly what user is associated with that particular flow. We've got a variety of techniques to go ahead and do that, but we want to make sure that we're providing access to the resource or the user who needs access to that particular resource. We don't want to kind of generalize it and say, because you're coming from this IP address, we assume you are user X. We want to actually pinpoint who that user is. App ID, this has kind of been a fundamental component of Palo Alto Networks since the inception of our firewall. We don't want to be creating policies or rules just based off of layer 3 or layer 4, so IP or port information. We want to actually look inside of the packets all the way up to, if you're familiar with the OSI model, layer 7 within that OSI model to actually profile what the application is. And this gives us the ability to kind of identify, as an example, when someone is trying to send HTTP traffic over DNS. Right? That's probably not your intent when you open up port 53, is to send HTTP traffic down that. So with App ID, we can identify when that activity is occurring and make sure that you're creating rules to go ahead and prevent things like that. The third component here is what we call host information profiles, or HIP as we refer to it here at Palo Alto Networks. And that is really kind of providing posture assessments about what is on that endpoint. Right, so we want to understand, does that device meet the compliance that we have associated with our organization? Right? Is it running a firewall? Does it have real-time protection enabled on the device? When was the last time a scan was run? Does it have the appropriate level of patching on that device? And when you combine all of that data, we can create profiles around those endpoints and really control where those endpoints can go within your organization. So if a user or an endpoint does not meet the appropriate criteria that you have set forth, you can limit their access. So as an example, if they're out of date as far as what the content is on their AV solution, let's only give that user access to your AV server to go ahead and push that latest patch down. Right? We don't want to go ahead and give them full access to the entire suite because we might not, or the entire enterprise, because we might not understand exactly what vulnerabilities or latest threats that might be compromised on that particular endpoint. All right, DNS Security, this is one of the more recent subscriptions to Palo Alto Networks. So for quite some time, we've had the ability to block things that were known to be bad. So we have a lot of intelligence gathered off of our entire customer base that we're able to glean from our wildfire data, right? So we can obviously identify domains that have been used and any type of vulnerability, exploit, command and control, et cetera. And we've always been able to deliver that to you in the form of signatures down to the firewalls themselves. Combine that with intelligence that we've gotten from the Cyber Threat Alliance and Unit 42. It's very robust in terms of what we're able to identify. But obviously, there's new techniques out there, or techniques that have been around for quite some time, that we need to go ahead and address, right? So we think about, command and control type behavior and the ability to leverage things like DGAs, domain-generated algorithms. These have the ability to kind of spin up domains that have never been seen before in the wild and used in any type of attack. So the traditional approach of looking things that were known to be bad isn't always the most effective for these more sophisticated type attacks. We need to perform analytics on that and understand the behavior of how those DNS requests are coming through. So what the DNS Security Service does is it takes the concept of providing that DNS security and it delivers that to you as a customer in a cloud delivered format. So we want to kind of send all these DNS requests up to the cloud and crunch that through our database and our analytics and identify when things are suspicious with, perhaps the frequency in terms of which a domain is being queried, maybe the length of the request itself. These are all indicators to us that something suspicious is happening within that particular endpoint. Or if we think about the concept of DNS tunneling, are they trying to exfiltrate data using those techniques as well? So DNS security gives us the ability to go ahead and prevent that activity. So this is kind of a newer subscription that we have that's available as a sub on any physical firewalls that you have, but you'll find with Prisma Access, all of the subscriptions are essentially included. We'll kind of touch upon that here in just a moment, but DNS security is natively built into the platform. Firewall as a service, so we talked a little bit about that in one of the previous slides. We really want to make sure that we're getting that full inspection bidirectionally for all ports and all protocols. So if we think about the approach with leveraging proxy, we're really kind of focusing or targeting HTTP, HTTPS traffic, perhaps even DNS and FTP, but that's not going to give you the visibility into the entire egress points for your networks. We want to make sure that we're sending that out to a full-blown Palo Alto Networks Layer 7 next-generation firewall. So the Prisma Access service incorporates the whole concept of a next-generation firewall delivered to you from that cloud. And what you'll see here is it's pretty robust and globally spread. So you have the ability to deploy a lot of firewalls here to support your organization. So having that one centralized device, panorama, in the case of Prisma Access, we're able to go ahead and make sure that we have that consistent policy across all of these different firewalls that we're deploying. So if you're familiar with Panorama and how we group things together, all of these firewalls that we're going to deploy here for you as part of Prisma Access manifest themselves within device groups. So when you're creating that policy, you're pushing that out to every single device that you have deployed here for you. So that ensures consistency, prevents drift of configuration on any one particular device. Threat prevention, for those of you who have been with Palo Alto Networks for quite some time, this is kind of, again, one of our core principles. So we're really focused on that single pass architecture. We want to be able to send that traffic through our data planes one time and be able to perform all of the events or functions that we need on that flow of traffic. So user ID, app ID, are we decrypting that traffic? Throw it through our content inspection engines. This gives us a performance benefit or a performance improvement against a lot of the competition that's out there, right? So being able to kind of send that traffic through once is a big win for you and your organization as far as performance goes. So DLP, this is a newer offering through Palo Alto Networks. So this, when we speak specific to Prisma Access, this is an add-on subscription that you can include. For those of you who are familiar with how we've kind of tackled this problem in the past, this has really manifested itself with two of our security profiles. So we had the data filtering profile, and then we had the file blocking profile. So when we talk about file blocking, what we're really doing is deep inspection of any of the files that are going through the firewall itself. So we're able to identify if it's a Word document, an Excel sheet, a text file, CSV file, et cetera, et cetera. that allows us to go ahead and create policy around how those files are shared into and out of your organization. So we can create policy that kind of prevents, say, the upload of any documents to a particular location, while only allowing, say, Word documents or PDF files to be downloaded from that one location. So that's still available within Prisma Access and the next generation firewall. The other type that we kind of talk about when we are kind of discussing the subject of DLP is that data filtering concept. So for quite some time, we've had the ability to leverage, basic regex patterns and classifications that you can apply to documents with the tool, say, like Titus, and we can look for when documents match that criteria and are trying to leave your organization, and we can essentially block those files from ever egressing from your environment out to file share site X. But what we're trying to do here is similar to what we just discussed with DNS Security and what we've always done with our Wildfire platform, and take that concept of DLP and essentially host that within the cloud. Right? So this gives us the flexibility or the benefit to take a single engine and leverage that against multiple Palo Alto Networks platforms. So this DLP engine has been around for quite some time. If you've ever heard of a product that we have called Aperture, it's now been rebranded to Prisma Saas. That DLP engine is kind of the core foundation of what we're doing with the DLP service. So the goal is to again, put this within a cloud and let multiple devices use the service. So whether that's a physical firewall, Prisma Access, Prisma Cloud, Prisma Saas, being able to create that policy one time and have that look for that data no matter where it resides is really powerful. So what you see here is kind of a few examples of some of the built-in data patterns that we have. I think the number is around 250 built-in data patterns that we have today. The goal is to get to over 3,000 plus data patterns, right? So ultimately, we want to make so that whatever that piece of sensitive data that you're looking for, we have a pattern available for you. If not, we still have our traditional approach, leveraging regex to go ahead and create things that are meaningful for your organization. And we want to combine that with things like proximity keywords. So as an example, if we're talking about something like a credit card number, we want to give you varying degrees of confidence that what we're seeing is actually a credit card number. So, from a low confidence perspective, maybe we're just running that check against the one algorithm. Is it a valid 16-digit number that passes the one check? Yes. Okay. So we have a low degree of confidence as to what that being a credit card number. But if I see perhaps the word CC number or credit card or the word Visa within 250 words of that match, then that gives me a higher degree of confidence that what I'm seeing is actually a credit card number that's associated with, say, Visa. And then if we take that to our highest level, we actually want to check to make sure it's a Visa credit card number. So you can create policy kind of leveraging a combination of these items to really make sure that, or to reduce the amount of false positives that you have. So just at a high level, think cloud delivered, shared across multiple platforms, set the policy once, it's looking for that data no matter where it resides. All right, so let's talk a little bit about CASB. So when we talk about kind of securing data going out to those SaaS-like applications, there's really two concepts to that from my perspective. We have data at rest and we have data in transit. So it's important to be able to make sure that we have that visibility from those endpoints, whether they're at home or in the office. So we can achieve that with Prisma Access, right? We have our VPN component to Prisma Access. We're going to get those users connected to a next generation file from where they're located. When they're in the office, they're going to egress out whatever that physical firewall is. So that gives us the ability to kind of control where your users are storing that data. So if we look at these top three buckets that we have here, unsanctioned, tolerated, and sanctioned, I kind of talk about the approach to these a little bit differently per each bucket. So unsanctioned applications are essentially locations where you don't want your users putting any of your data, right? So by taking advantage of layer 7 policies, we're able to restrict where they're going with that traffic, right? So think of things that have copyright infringement laws. You have no idea what they're going to do when you upload documents to those locations. Do they have the ability to share it with whoever wants to give them some money? You want to keep your users away from those sites. When we talk about tolerated applications, that's when we want to kind of take advantage of some of those security profiles that we had spoken about. right? So this gives us the granular capability to create rules that say, as we discussed before, I don't want to allow the uploads of any documents to these locations, but we can download specific file types. So think of these as perhaps the, Dropboxes, boxes, and, G drives of the world that you don't have an enterprise account with. But your business relies on those to go ahead and do business with third parties. They want to share documents with you. You can't necessarily restrict access to all of these locations, but you want to make sure that you have visibility and control about what's happening when your users do interact with those applications. The final one is what I'll call sanctioned applications. So these are services that you're actually paying a third party for to deliver some type of service for you. So for these, we want to have that same level of control for that data while it's in transit that we can achieve with that next generation firewall. But what happens to that data once it goes beyond the perimeter? We want to show you what's happening within that environment as well. So we want to, scan all of the content that exists in those locations and classify it, right? So we're going to bubble that up to higher level categories. This is financial data. This is PII data. This is legal data, et cetera. And once we have that understanding of what's within the documents, we want to show you contextually how that data is being used. Who is it being shared with? People outside of your organization? Is it exposed to the entire internet? We want to scan it for malware. And then we also want to show you what's happening from a user activity and security controls perspective in each of those environments. So we're able to do that by simply leveraging the API functionality of those SaaS-based applications and reporting that to you within a dashboard that allows you to at first gain that visibility, and then secondly, once you have that comfort level about what your data looks like, you can then go ahead and start to create some controls within that environment. So you can create policies that say, as an example, if I have PII data and it's shared publicly, I need to take some type of action. So you can remove that public share from that file. If we're talking about malware, we can quarantine that file in its particular location. If we have users perhaps setting up email forwarding rules to domains that are not associated with your organization, that's something that you probably want to be aware of. So we could do something as simple as sending that user an email, reminding them of the corporate policy, creating an incident, and allowing an administrator to go ahead and work through that. So a lot of different options there when we talk about SaaS protection for those enterprise applications. Okay, so let's talk specifically about Prisma Access here and what we're doing to kind of address some of these challenges. So the topic of the day is obviously kind of focused around your mobile workforce, but I want to show you and make sure there's an understanding in terms of how robust this solution really is. So what you're looking at here is what the cloud footprint of Prisma Access looks like. And at its highest level, what we're doing with Prisma Access is taking that same next generation firewall and we're delivering that to you from the cloud. So we've partnered with several of the largest public cloud providers that are out there in order to go ahead and deliver you this service. The service is based on AWS and GCP, so we get a lot of benefits associated with that, and we'll talk to a few of these here in just a moment. But a couple things that are important to remember here. So this is cloud delivered. Everything that you see here is going to be dedicated to you. We don't incorporate that concept of multi-tenancy with any of these firewalls that we have deployed. A little bit different than the model that's out there in a lot of different places, where they just take kind of big boxes and they deploy those in like Equinix-like data centers. And that kind of is a multi-tenancy environment. So shared resources in terms of compute, shared IP addresses for going out to the internet. So there's obviously some benefits to kind of creating that single tenant environment that we'll talk to here in just a moment. If we talk specifically about IP addressing, we're able to provide you with dedicated IP addresses to each of these gateways that you have deployed, right? They're not shared. So as an example, if you're doing business with third parties and they have any type of source IP address whitelisting, you can provide them with IP addresses that belong to just your organization. So from a security perspective, big win there. From a functional perspective, the benefit of having a single IP address or an IP address associated with just your organization, you're in control of your own destiny in terms of how the internet sees that. Right? When we run in that multi-tenant mode and you have a shared IP address, you're not going to feel the ripple effect of, company XYZ that you have no relation to doing something on the internet that perhaps they shouldn't and creating some type of a blacklist for that IP address. That obviously has the impact to your organization if something like that were to happen and you were using that IP address. So big win there as far as some security and functionality. As far as the decision to go public cloud, that was an easy decision for us pretty early on. These companies have spent billions in infrastructure and kind of, fine-tuning the auto-scaling, the delivery mechanisms of these particular cloud services. And they've also spent a lot of money just with infrastructure. Think about, fiber runs that have been run globally throughout the world. We want to take advantage of all of that with this solution. So as far as one of the first advantages, it is access to that premium fiber network. So as opposed to kind of riding over general internet for a lot of this traffic, we want to get you onto the Prisma Access backbone as quickly as possible, and we want to ride that as far as possible, regardless of what that destination is. So whether your data exists in infrastructure as a service, software as a service, or even in your own data center, we want to ride that network as far as we can to kind of get you off the general congestion of the internet. Resiliency, so any of the firewalls that we deploy here for you that provide connectivity back to your physical locations, we're going to deploy those within an HA pair. So we'll take one firewall and we'll deploy that within an availability zone within that particular region. And we'll take a second firewall and we'll deploy that within an alternate availability zone within that region. And this is just giving us some assurances that if something, in the unlikely event, something were to happen within the public cloud, that we'll continue to be able to maintain that access for that particular connection. And the final piece, which is most relevant here, is the scalability factor, right? So just thinking back to some of those conversations that I was speaking to earlier, wouldn't it be nice to be able to scale out horizontally when we have these issues as far as congestion or bandwidth goes? So what we're doing is essentially monitoring these firewalls for you. And in the event we see any type of congestion on that firewall, whether that's number of users, session counts, just general compute health, we'll simply scale that out horizontally to provide you with another gateway within that particular region to ensure that you're going to have that same consistent performance. And when we talk about performance, there's obviously a lot of factors that go into how well a firewall performs, but as part of this service, we're offering all of our security subscriptions. So threat prevention, URL filtering, DNS security, wildfire, all of those subs are included with a Prisma Access purchase. The final one I'll throw in there isn't really a subscription, but if you've ever tried to do this before, I'm sure you can appreciate it's a pretty resource-intensive operation, and that's SSL decrypt. Right, so we want to be able to decrypt that traffic to take advantage of all of those inspection features. We need to be able to see inside of that tunnel. So with our infinite scalability here, we can make sure that we have the compute necessary within that particular region to support your infrastructure. So we like to kind of describe this model as a shared responsibility model. So there's certain things that we want to control or offload for you as an organization, and most of those are kind of around that mundane operational type tasks. So anything that you see here is deployable via Panorama. You're using Panorama to go ahead and manage Prisma Access. You're choosing which locations are important for your organizations in order to bring that connectivity as close as possible as to where those users reside. So once you kind of say you want a firewall deployed in a particular location, we're simply just pushing that change out into the public cloud, right? So we're using orchestration engines on the back end, and we're deploying or spinning up those firewalls for you dynamically within our public cloud partnerships as you're going on board multiple locations. So we're going to handle all that initial deployment piece for you. Other items that we're going to handle, firmware upgrades. If you think about something at scale like this and the significance or the volume of different firewalls that you have deployed, you'll be giving up, nights and weekends for quite some time when you have to go ahead and push some type of a patch out. We take care of that for you. We're going to upgrade the content and the firmware on those devices, things that you no longer have to worry about. And then obviously uptime. We're going to make sure the service is up and operational for you as a customer of Prisma Access. What we want you to concentrate on is creating effective policy for your organization. So that kind of manifests itself, like I said, with a device group and a template within Panorama. So if you have that familiarity in terms of how to create policies, it's identical, right? These are just our VM, next-gen firewalls hosted in the cloud. So when you group them together, you're able to push the same security profiles and policies to those devices. All right, so let's kind of talk about the different types of connections that we have within the service and kind of how everything interacts with one another. The first type of connection that we have is really our mobile user connection. So this leverages Global Protect Agent, which is essentially just a piece of software that will install on the endpoint itself. And we want to establish a connection to the closest location, just going back to that map view on the previous slide, that's available to the user. So you're controlling or dictating to us which locations are important. Those users, when they go to connect, are going to connect to the closest gateway to where they're located, right? So that gives them that local, that language localization aspects to the service. The search results, the map views, et cetera, are all attainable here. And like I said, ultimately the goal is to improve their performance without sacrifice anything from a control and visibility standpoint. We also have the concept of a clientless VPN connection as well, right? So if you have users where you don't necessarily have the ability to deploy that Global Protect agent, you can access this service via a clientless VPN. So just use a web browser. And there you can publish HTML-based applications on your internal organization and give those users access to specific resources that you wouldn't necessarily be able to provide them with, without sacrificing any type of security. So that connection is going to go through our next generation firewall so that we can ensure that we provide that same content inspection for traffic that's coming in. Right? It's important, particularly if we're talking about those BYOD devices, that we're able to do that. So as far as benefits or things that we're able to achieve with this type of model, one of them is always on, right? So when your user goes home, you can really tailor that experience in terms of what you want that interaction to be. So we have a variety of different authentication methods to kind of help you with that. If you wanted that complete seamless experience, where a user simply just opens up their laptop and they're automatically connected into the service, they would have full access to the internet and any resources internally, you can achieve that, right? So we can use things like certificate-based authentication or single sign-on where we're taking your Windows credential and using that to authenticate against your LDAP server. We can do that. If you wanted to use something like SAML and multi-factor, we can integrate with those services as well. But ultimately, you want to create that condition where you're not adding any friction to the user experience, right? You want to make sure that they're not trying to, again, circumvent anything that you're trying to do here to ensure that connectivity for that particular user. And then we talked a bit about HIP profiles earlier, another really important part here when we talk about those users who aren't necessarily, checked into your physical locations at all times. So it's really important to understand, are they getting the right patches? Has anything been disabled on that endpoint that we need to go ahead and remedy? All of those features are available to you with that concept of HIP profiles. The second type of connection that we have as part of the service is our remote office connectivity. So this is where we're kind of establishing connections, leveraging IPsec from those environments into Prisma access. So same concept here as far as the deployment of those firewalls. It's simply just a different transport mechanism. So we don't care what that device is on the edge. It can be our appliance, a router, another firewall, an SD-WAN device. As long as it's terminating or capable of terminating an IPsec tunnel, we can establish a connection to that particular location. The difference between this and, say, a mobile user VPN, when we're in these physical or when we use this method of connectivity from one of your remote office locations, this gives us the ability to get insight or control over all of the devices that sit within that environment. So think about printers, IoT type devices where you can't necessarily install an agent. This technique, we're able to route that traffic into Prisma access to be able to give you that control. So this is a routed solution. So as you're onboarding these different remote office locations, we're defining what subnets exist on the opposite side of the tunnel here. Right? So when traffic comes in from a remote office and it needs to access another remote office location, we're building this mesh in the cloud that's allowing this interconnectivity from all of these different locations. So another great benefit or an operational burden that we're kind of easing or offloading for you. Right? We're handling all the routing protocols that are necessary to make all of this connectivity happen. The last type of connection that we have here is what we call a service connection. So service connections are designed to give you access to where your internal resources reside. So think, data centers, infrastructure as a service. Those are all prime candidates for service connections. Same concept here. We're going to use IPsec to onboard those locations. And again, we're going to create that mesh for you to give you access to those environments. We spoke about this already, but we manage everything through Panorama. So there's just a small plugin that we enable on the box itself, and this allows us to communicate over API into the Prisma Access infrastructure. So we can pull in, log data. You'll see here everything kind of gets stored in what we call the Cortex data lake. It's just a centralized repository for that log information. Those logs can be forwarded out to, if you're using a SIM or a long-term log retention server, we can get that log data and forward that over to you as well. But the important thing here is just from a management perspective, you're able to reuse or repurpose all of the different objects and policies that you've created within your existing Panorama. And then from a visibility standpoint, it's a single pane of glass here. So if your user is kind of outside of the network, you don't have a different console or a different log to go ahead and look at. It's all going to be present within the existing log data that we have. So if we're familiar with it, traffic logs, URL filtering logs, et cetera, when you're running those reports and looking at those logs to say who went to the Facebook or a social media site, you're going to see that all in that one view, right? You're not jumping around to a bunch of different places. So, in summary here, we have a lot of options to go ahead and handle that traffic no matter where your user are located, physical or remote office locations, or outside of the network when they're at home, the hotel, Starbucks, et cetera, to make sure that you're providing that positive experience for your users and not sacrificing any of the security that you would expect when the users are outside of the office.